We'll start with our first topic in the syllabus, and that is 1.1, which talks about meaning, scope, and development of anthropology. One point one is meaning, scope, and development of anthropology. Right? Next topic is what? It is about comparison of, can somebody read out? One. Relationship with other disciplines, right? Second topic will be relationship with other disciplines. Okay? And third one is the subparts of anthropology, right? Particularly biological, cultural, archaeological, linguistic anthropology. Now, see, the whole point is these first three topics that are part of our syllabus should technically be done at the end of the course, right? Should technically be done at the end of the course, because by the end of the course, you have much knowledge about different dimensions of the anthropology. But what we will do is we'll first introduce ourselves to the discipline, get introduced to so many thinkers and the works that have been done, so that we are well acquainted with the vocabulary of the anthropology. Okay, during these discussions, let's say, what is the meaning of the anthropology? What is the scope of the anthropology, or how anthropology as a discipline has developed? What were the different approaches that had developed during this time? So we'll have to write what? In the answers in these questions, we'll have to put up a summary of all of these, right? And then there are subparts like biological anthropology, archaeological. Their scope is much wide. So that thing, I think that those topics, I think we should pick them up later. While the second topic, that is relationship with the other disciplines. Now, see, these are pretty simple topics as such, if somebody has already gone through all of the subparts of the discipline. But what happens is in the examination, we tend to overlook these ideas. We tend to not prepare these topics, that these are simple topics, I'll just take them up in the examination right away. But you fail to understand that sometimes in the examination, 20 to 30 marks questions can be asked from these three perspectives, especially the relationship of the anthropology with other disciplines. Right? Then there are certain topics which are mentioned at a very minimal level in the syllabus. They are not the primary focus of the syllabus. For example, the 2.2. What is the 2.2? Concept of
nature of society.
The nature and concept of society. Nature and concept of society. In this, you also have the topic of social stratification, right? Social institutions, social groups, social stratification. These topics are there. People who have the syllabus ready with them, just go through this, right? These are the topics. Now, you see, these topics are not the very main topics of anthropology, because generally the discussions that we have in the discipline surround only the few important topics like physical anthropology or the socio-cultural anthropology or the theories part of it, or the important institutions like marriage, kinship, family, etc. Right? But these are simpler topics which we also need to prepare, and you will always find one question or two questions from these topics. For example, in one of the years, they asked a very typical question as to what is meant by the term total institutions. Now, the concept and nature of the society per se is a part of sociology as a discipline. But because sociology and anthropology are similar in some contexts, that is why we draw some things from the sociology as a discipline also here, in especially the topic of nature and concept of the Indian society, right? So for majority of these things, I'll be dictating you the notes. But for few, I'll be giving you ready-made notes, which I had dictated in the last class, so that we save some time on that. Otherwise, this topic can go on unending for almost one month or so, right? I'll explain you in the class. I'll give you the handout. You just read them out and copy them in your notebook. Everybody following? People online? I'll share the PDF of the class notes that I had dictated in the last batch, where all the comparison of the anthropology with almost all the famous disciplines is complete. All you need to know is, you need to know the basic grasp of it, develop a basic structure as to what is the structure that you're going to follow while writing the answer. so that we can start with the more important topics in the syllabus, like what is culture, right? Then like what are the important theories in the sociocultural anthropology. So first we'll try to cover the sociocultural anthropology, then we'll jump on to the physical anthropology, which is again an integrated syllabus involving your evolution, involving your fossils, that is your paleontology, and of course your last genetics part. Okay, we'll take them up separately after the sociocultural is over. But in the initial classes, we are going to take a glimpse of all these important aspects so that we are well acquainted with these topics and we are ready for the exam answer writing. Because these are pretty straightforward, and if you do not have some grasp over these topics, it will be difficult for you to write the answers. So rather than wasting time in dictating the notes for them, I'll be dictating notes for the other topics, which are far more important and in which more number of questions are asked in the examination. Agree? Yes, no? Yes. Okay. What did we discuss in the yesterday's class or in the Friday's class? We discussed brief overview of anthropology as a discipline. Right? We discussed brief overview of anthropology as a discipline as to how the anthropology as a discipline started. Agree? In the first class, we discussed different ideas as to how the study of the other cultures started in anthropology. How it began as a study of understanding the other cultures. What are the different views that have been used? And we have looked at certain general terms that we have used during the discussion in that class. For example, there are terms which are recurrently used like degenerationism, progressivism, evolutionism, psychic unity of the mankind, diffusionism. Agree? We have heard about some of these terms, which we are going to further integrate while we are going to study from now on. So the first topic that you need to write is, what is anthropology? If this question is posed to you, what is anthropology? What should be the approach, or what would be your answer to that question?
How the culture has evolved over time.
Okay.
It is the science or study of man.
Okay. किसी ने किताब खोली घर जाके वीकेंड पे? कौन सी किताब खोली? SCRT खोली और पढ़े पहला चैप्टर? नहीं पढ़ा? क्या है उसमें फर्स्ट चैप्टर में? They start with the definitions of the anthropology that have been given by different anthropologists. So whenever we are going to discuss any concept in anthropology, especially in the socio-cultural anthropology, we always need to go with a definition first, right? Now, what we tend to forget or we tend to misunderstand regarding these definitions is we tend to become over-ambitious while we are preparing these topics. For example, related to anthropology, I'll remember almost 10 definitions. This is how we start. Then what will happen is, let's say you start with the institution of marriage. You go on learning about 4 or 5 definitions. Right? Or for, let's say, kinship. You start with 4 or 5 definitions. But the whole point is, via the definitions, we tend to come at a general understanding of the discipline or any concept for that matter. So it will be convenient for you to use or remember the most simplest and the most easiest definitions of all. Because what you are highlighting is anthropology as, or what is the meaning of the anthropology, has been studied by various anthropologists for that matter. They have given their own definitions for this topic, that is what is anthropology, right? And out of this, we are taking this definition as a reference. So to start with this answer, we are going to start with, let's say, what has been told by Herzgovitz, one of the anthropologists, by Kluckhohn, one of the anthropologists. Right? You start with the definition. And then there are various other anthropologists who have given these definitions. And the important characteristics of the anthropology as a discipline and the meaning of the anthropology that come out from these definitions is this, and this. Agree? So starting with this, if you look at anthropology, the definition has been first given by Melville J. Herzgovitz. Herzgovitz was one of the anthropologists belonging to the American School of Anthropology. And he gave the definition that anthropology is nothing but the study of man and his works. What is the definition that he gives? It is the study of man and his works. He starts with this, saying that anthropology is the study of man and his works. Kluckhohn, another American anthropologist, has come up with the definition of anthropology, highlighting that out of all the social sciences that study various aspects of the man, anthropology comes nearest to the total study of the mankind. Anthropology comes nearest to the total study of the mankind. So in these definitions that they have talked about till now, they are referring to so many different dimensions of the discipline itself. For example, if you look at this definition, how you break up this definition and how you understand the different dimensions of this definition. For example, if you study any definition in any of the concepts in anthropology, if you closely observe the definition, what it is trying to do is it is trying to encompass one very important dimension of the concept or the discipline as such. If you look at this definition, what does it say? It refers to the study of man and his works. Right? What Hertzgovitz here is referring to as the man is necessarily the biological aspect of the human beings. The biological aspect of the human being. Biological means in what sense? Biological means we have always been curious about how human beings have become the human beings that they are. What have been the processes in the past which have made the human beings the biological human beings that they are. Right? In this, we already know that in the physical anthropology, we study the concept of evolution or the biological evolution propounded by whom? Darwin. Agree? We study what? We study the biological evolution that has happened and how the human beings have become the human beings that they are today. So in short, in the first part of the definition, what he is referring to is the physical anthropology to some extent, or the biological aspect of the human beings. Right? While in the second part, he says that during this biological evolution that has happened, human beings have developed a very unique capability. Human beings have developed what? A very unique capability. And that capability is sometimes referred to as the culture. This capability is sometimes referred to as what? The culture. Right? And what exactly is referred to by the culture? Culture as a phenomena has been studied so deeply in anthropology that a very general understanding of the culture is it is nothing but the learned ideas and behaviors. The learned ideas and the behaviors which are characteristic of a particular society. We are going to write everything down. Don't worry. Sab kuch likhenge. But in the first place, you just try to understand it. How the definitions are given, how you break those definitions and try to come up with an understanding of what exactly is being referred to in these definitions. Sometimes it becomes really difficult to break almost all the definitions. So while you're writing a discourse on what is anthropology or define anthropology, you may be picking up at least one or two definitions. And then you go on describing about the different dimensions of the anthropology which have been used by different anthropologists in their definitions. ठीक है? Not necessarily कि आप सारी definition याद कर लो. क्योंकि पढ़ते हो अभी आप बहुत ambitious हो गए, सब कुछ कर लेंगे. और लास्ट में इतनी सारा इकट्ठा हो जाएगा कि कुछ भी याद नहीं रहता है. So better would be to understand the different dimensions of what exactly is anthropology. And remember a few definitions which are standard in nature, which are mentioned in almost every source that you are going to study. ठीक है ना? जैसे सबसे पहला हमारा क्वेश्चन आता है कि सर यूनिक आंसर मैं कैसे लिखूंगा? आता है? यूनिक आंसर बहुत बाद की बात है. पहले बहुत बेसिक बात अपन सीख लें. If you have learned the basic aspects, then uniqueness will definitely come in the end. And even if I tell you the same thing, all of you will come up with a very different answer. Because everybody has a different way of expressing the ideas. Right? The uniqueness in the first place comes from that aspect only. And then with the later understanding of the anthropology, as the discipline unfolds, your understanding will broaden. And then your understanding of what anthropology is will also broaden. You'll be able to appreciate much about what exactly is meant by the biological aspect of the human being that the anthropology focuses to study. Right? Or what exactly is the understanding of culture that has been focused here. Okay? So in short, First, the biological aspect refers to what? The biological human that we are today. Because man as a common term has been used in the past. Today, we do not use that term quite often, but the standard definition that was given at that time had such understanding. For example, even today, the tribal cultures are referred to as the primitive cultures, right? But today, the understanding is that they are not necessarily primitive as compared to us. It is we who consider them as primitive. But the term, because it has been used in the past, is still being used today, right? So similarly, in this case, the term man is used here, right? And man and his works. So man refers to what? The biological aspects, right? The story of the evolution. Then in the works, we refer to culture. Culture is what? The set of learned ideas or behaviors which are characteristic of a particular society. Because the underlying notion is that if you are born in one particular society, whatever you learn is characteristic of that particular society. For example, if all of us were born in America, our culture would be reflecting what? The ideas and behaviors which are characteristic of the American society, and not the ideas and behaviors which are characteristic of the Indian society. Agree? Yes or no? What we are going to refer to the culture, if we were born in a very different society, let's say you were born in a tribe in Africa, what would your learned ideas and behaviors would be? The underlying assumption in this concept of the culture is that human beings learn the culture once they are born here. And a common distinction that is done between the humans and the animal kingdom is that majority of the animal behavior is instinctive in nature. Majority of the animal behavior is instinctive in nature. To some extent, animals also learn certain behaviors. But this learning is not as complex as what it is in the human beings. Animals can learn, for example, if you teach a dog to pick up the ball once it is thrown, the dog learns and it remembers everything. No doubt about that. Human beings also learn that. But the whole point of in human culture is that the human culture is far more complex. If you look at this idea, even the chimpanzees learn how to use the stick as a tool to take out the termites to eat. Right? But in general, what is understood is the behavior of the animals is instinctive in nature, while the behavior of the humans is cultural in nature. Or the behavior that we have is something that we have learned by the virtue of being a member of the society. Right? It is a discussion for another day, but in general, we need to understand this. Right? Now, in this culture, we are referring to the points what? The ideas and the behaviors. The ideas and behaviors that you have learned. Now, these ideas and behaviors, if you look at broadly around yourself, they are reflected in almost all facets of your life. For example, the food that you're eating, the clothes that you're wearing, and the idea the idea that you have to wear the clothes in the first place is in itself is an idea that you have learned. That was taught to you at some point of time in your childhood. Yes or no? Agree? Following? So what happens is, these are the things that we have already learned. Plus what happens is, these ideas and behaviors are not just the things that we are talking about or the behaviors that we are observing. We also see this in the material culture around us. We also see these ideas and behaviors in what? In the material world that we have constructed ourselves. For example, human beings are the only ones who develop such elaborate houses. Human beings have such elaborate material possessions, right? That they had learned at one point of time, which has been carried forward in the next generation, which keeps on evolving at every point of time. Right or wrong? You see, human beings are the one who construct roads, who construct automobiles. Right? No other animal on this planet does that. किसी एनिमल ने अभी तक बैलगाड़ी भी नहीं बनाई, और हम लोग इतना कॉम्प्लेक्स करके उसको मार्स पे पहुंच गए. पहुंच रहे कि नहीं पहुंच रहे? So human beings possess this very unique capability that is called as something that they learn, the ideas and behaviors. And these are not just that you learn over a lifetime, you also pass it on to the generations to come. And it gets accumulated over a period of time. For example, today, the life that you are leading, has everything been invented by you? No, not necessarily. Majority of the things are already existing. You already try to learn them, incorporate them in your understanding, and then you try to develop on these ideas which are already existing. Right? New types of phones might develop tomorrow, but you know that there is something called as phone which is used for communication. Right? So these ideas and behaviors, if you broadly look at them, they can be divided into what? The material aspects and what? Non-material aspects. Material aspects and what? Non-material aspects. Right? All these material aspects and non-material aspects are nothing but the works of the human beings on this planet. These are the things that human beings have developed over a period of time, which have accumulated over a period of time, which are characteristic of a particular society. Agree? So the first part of the definition that we understand here is what? It involves biological aspects as to how we have become the human beings that we are, following the ideas that were propounded initially by Darwin, right? Or the ideas that were consolidated by Darwin on the basis of his observations regarding the idea of evolution of the species, right? Second aspect is related to whatever works that the human beings have done. And these two also are not isolated in this sense. These two go hand in hand. The idea that the biological aspect and the works that the human beings have done, these are not isolated with each other. They go hand in hand. For example, during the course of the evolution, human beings did what? In the biological sphere, in the human beings, the brain size developed considerably or increased considerably in proportion to their bodies. Right? The complexity of the neural networks in the brain increased considerably. Right? Which increase the cognitive capability of the human beings, which makes human beings what we call as the smart beings today. Right? Which gives us immense capability of understanding, and cognitive capabilities are given to us because of this complexity in the brain that happened during the course of the evolution. For example, the chimpanzee's brain is smaller as compared to human brains, which is almost around 1400 cc, 1400 cc, cubic centimeters, while the chimpanzee's brain is somewhere around 500 cc, right? 500 to 450 cc, right? So one understanding was that with the increasing brain size, the intelligence has increased. And this intelligence is what led to the development of what we know as the culture today. This increase in the intelligence is what led to the idea that we call as the culture today. Yes or no? Yes. This also helped us in developing all the complexities of the culture in the later parts. But the beginning of the culture that we see is closely found to be underlying or lying somewhere between the biological and the cultural aspects. For example, the initial evidences of the culture that we find are what? The stone tools. Initial evidences of the culture are what? Stone tools. तुम्हें कौन सा evidence याद आ रहा था? कुछ और? Initial evidence of the culture is stone tools. So would it be wrong to say that before the human beings used the stones as tools, were they not using any tools? Right? So they might be using such tools already with the substances that are found in the nature, which we also find the primates also doing the same thing. For example, you will find chimpanzees also using certain things which are found naturally. For example, they would break a stick, use it as a tool. But the problem with this is these are perishable items. The problem with these tools is what? They are perishable. If you go on excavating and you find a stick, you'll not be able to understand if it has not been worked upon skillfully. Right? Or if chimpanzees are throwing the stones, they might be using them as tools. But if, let's say, after thousands of years, that stone has been excavated in one of the excavation, you'll not be able to tell that was this stone used as a tool or not. Only if it was modified in some way or the other. can you call it as a stone tool? The idea of tool making is what? That when a naturally occurring substance has been modified for a further purpose or use. Following? Right? So in the works, we refer to what? The material and the non-material aspects of the culture, while initially we refer to the man as the biological man. And although for the sake of simplicity, we divide both of them, but it will be wrong to say that they were functioning independently. They have developed over a course of time together, hand in hand. Right? So what exactly does then the anthropology study here? Another definition that has been given by Kluckhohn is that anthropology comes closest to the total study of the mankind. It comes closest to the total study of the mankind. Here, what is happening is, in whole of these processes that we are studying here, even the biological evolution, even the cultural evolution, even the cultural aspects or the biological aspects, one thing that we focus upon is the holistic understanding of these phenomena. One thing that we focus upon is the holistic understanding of these phenomena. Right? For example, what is meant by the holistic? If let's say you have to define or explain this institution holistically, मैं आपको बोलूंगी इस बिल्डिंग को डिफाइन करो, क्या है बिल्डिंग? You will come up with your own ideas. One would say that this is an educational institution. Right? Other would want to only say that it is only a building. कोई वहां पर अटक जाएगा. Right? Somebody would want to focus on specific feature that it is a building that is located in one locality. Agree or not? So all of the individuals, if they are asked, they are going to deal with what? Only one aspect of it. But anthropology as a unique discipline has developed and evolved in such a manner that it makes the understanding of the human beings pretty holistic in nature, because it has two underlying principles that it focuses upon. Because it has two important principles that it focuses upon. One is the universals. Universal. What is universal? What is found everywhere? What is the broad generalization that you can do about it? For example, related to the biological aspect of the human being, broad generalization is what? Human beings have also evolved from the already existing species on the planet. Broad generalization. Agree or not? Human beings belong to an order which is called as the primate. Generalization. Or a universal. Right? Even within primate, humans belong to the genus Homo. कह सकते हैं? But in these generalizations also, we do not forget about the differences that are there within these generalizations. We go for generalizations. At the same time, we also look at the various differences or the diversities. Universals and differences or the diversity. These are the two principles which make our discipline a holistic discipline. In the biological, we have tried to understand this. In the cultural aspect, for example, in the learned ideas and the behaviors, marriage is one of the institutions that we see in the society, right? And we have been saying that these are ideas that have been learned by the human beings by being a member of a particular society. Right? And I have given you the example that if you were born in American society, your values and ideas would be different, or ideas and behaviors would be different. But was this statement true in the right sense? Can you still find commonalities between the American culture and the Indian culture? क्या है common in American culture and Indian culture? Clothing, marriage, family. Almost all the aspects that you find in the American culture, you also find in what? Indian culture. Right? So by comparing and contrasting, you tend to find out what are the universal things, what are the broad generalizations that you can do about the humanity. whichever field you are referring to. What are the broad generalizations, or what are the broad universals that you can draw related to human beings in all these aspects? Right? For example, if you compare the Indian society and American society, if you look at them, the broad generalization that you can do is that marriage as an institution is found in American society also. It is found in Indian society also. Right? Not just in Indian society, it is also found in tribal societies. Right? It is found in Russian society, in American society, in Central Asian society, which means what? The broad generalization that is there is that marriage is found almost across all the societies. Yes or no? So we started with understanding that it refers to the biological man and the works that he has done, right? But we do not just stop here. First, we understand that they go hand in hand. The processes of the biological understanding and the process of the cultural understanding. Both of them go hand in hand. At the same time, the crux that comes out of understanding that has been developed in the anthropology is that it is looking for the universals as well as the diversities, right? Or the differences. Agree or not? For example, the way in which marriage as an institution is studied by anthropology as a discipline is not just about the function that the marriage plays in a society. It's not just about the role that marriage plays in the society. Right? But also in the sense that how it is differently practiced in the different societies. Despite marriage being a universal phenomena across the societies, you find what? That there are certain differences related to the marital practices in different societies. There are different rules of marrying in different societies. Marriage as an idea itself tells us what? That it is opposed to random mating. Like what we studied in the evolution, it also talked about what? The evolution of the institutions, following the ideas of promiscuity into polygamy, into monogamy. This is what we studied in the first class. Right? But if you look at marriage as an institution, you'll find that marriage simply means the regulated way of mating for procreation in the society at a very general level, not getting into any details here. Right? But how the societies regulate this institution of mating? What are exactly these rules? First, all of us agree that the mating in the human societies is regulated. Right? It is opposed to the random mating that you find in most of the animals. Right? How exactly do they regulate? What are the rules that are used by these societies? What are the rules that are used by these societies for marriage as an institution? Right? You might be finding some sort of diversity. And even within these rules, you might be finding certain universals. For example, one of the very common rule in marriage as an idea is the rule of incest taboo. Which states that you cannot marry your siblings or your parents. Blood relation will be wrong to use. करेंगे बात इस पे. But in general, what you say is you are restricted to marry your closest relatives, which are your siblings and your parents. A blood relatives word use करने से problem कहाँ होती है? For example, let's say a family was there. इनका एक लड़का हुआ और इन्होंने एक लड़की अडॉप्ट कर ली. ब्लड रिलेशन तो नहीं हुआ अडॉप्शन में. Even then the incest taboo applies there. Agree or not? Even then the incest taboo still applies there. So in this we find what? That there is a universal in the rules also, which is what? Incest taboo, which restricts marriage between the closely related individuals within a family, right? As well as the parents. Okay? Incest word itself is related to this only. So we have an incest taboo, which is a rule, which is universal again, right? Then how many should one individual marry? How many individuals can one individual marry? कितनों से एक साथ शादी कर सकता है? In some societies, you can marry through what? Only one individual marrying one individual. Right? Such marriages are called as what? Monogamous marriages. Right? If one individual marries more than one individuals, right? If one male member is marrying more than one women, it is called as polygyny. While if one woman is marrying more than one man, it is called as polyandry. Agree? Then there are other rules like exogamy, like endogamy. For example, the simplest example in the Indian society is that we follow the principle of caste endogamy, marrying within the caste. People belonging to one caste can marry with each other. Although there are still restrictions like incest taboo. Even within the caste, the incest taboo still applies. Right? Also, you have to follow the rules of Gotra exogamy. That you cannot marry individuals belonging to your same Gotra. You'll have to marry outside your Gotra. Yes or no? Right? While there is rule of endogamy. So you find that even in this behavior, which we call as the regulated behavior, we find so much diversity, so many differences, right? So many practices. For example, certain societies have rules for preference of a particular mate. Abhi to non general negative rules bana diye. Negative means incest. You cannot marry this. Anybody outside this you can marry. Anybody outside the family you can marry. Let's say this is the close circle of family. You can marry outside this. Right? But till what extent? Endogamy, caste endogamy. Right? Inwards. Right? Even beyond this sphere, what is the sphere? Gotra. Exogamy. Right? This is a broad generalization that they have done for a particular rule. Right? In some societies, they have preferential rules. These are the preferred individuals which you should marry. Here they are saying you should not marry outside the caste. General rule. Right? Within the caste, whom you can marry? Outside Gotra or within the caste, anybody who falls in this sphere. The possibility of marriage is there. Right? But there are specific rules in certain societies that you need to prefer such a mate. In general, that needs to be followed. If it is not possible, then you can go for some other partner. Right? For example, in certain societies, there are cousin marriages. There are cousin marriages. Cousin marriages are practiced in certain societies. Cross cousin, parallel cousin. Cousin marriages mean? Children who are not necessarily belonging to one family. They marry the closest relatives of their families. Right? In this also there are rules. If let's say there are two brothers, and if their children are going to marry, or if their children are allowed to marry, such kind of a setting is called as parallel cousin marriage. Parallel cousin, why? Because both of them are brothers and they belong to the same gender. If there are two sisters and their children are allowed to marry under the cousin marriages, it will be called as again the parallel cousin marriage. While if there is one brother and one sister and their children are preferred to marry, it will be called as cross cousin. Agree? So in broad terms, what we find is in anthropology, the main focus are these universals and the differences. There are universals and differences that you find across the societies. And they are intrinsically part of anthropology as a discipline. Okay? Then what makes anthropology unique? Anthropology, broadly though, we understand through these definitions that these are some characteristic features that come out of the anthropology and the disciplines used by and the definitions used by various anthropologists till now. What makes anthropology unique in this sense? Why is anthropology considered unique here? Out of all the observations related to anthropology, there are 4 features that have been identified as distinct for anthropology and its approaches, which you rarely find in any other discipline. And these have come out to make anthropology as a very unique discipline, because that is an approach that has been uniquely developed by the anthropology over its evolution, right? First in this line is that it is holistic. We've already seen holistic. Why? Because it looks at the different dimensions of the human beings. Biological, cultural, right? Biological, how we have evolved over a period of time. Cultural, what are the different aspects of our culture, right? How both of them go hand in hand. In those, what are the universals? What are the differences, right? Second is your cultural relativism. Mobile phones, kripya. Cultural relativism, right? Third is participant observation. And finally, cross-cultural comparisons. It is holistic in nature. Second is cultural relativism is one of the important aspects that is unique to anthropology. Third is participant observation. Fourth is cross-cultural comparisons. If you look at the holistic aspect of it, holistic means it is opposed to an approach which is called as atomistic approach. For example, there are different disciplines which also study different dimensions of the mankind. There are different disciplines which study different dimensions of the mankind. For example, there is political science. Political science is interested in studying what? Only political institutions. Only the political institutions to that approach. So its specific focus is what? The political institutions. Agree? Economics wants to study the economic institutions as such. Their focus is fixed. Whatever they want to study is only economics, right? Only a passing reference to other dimensions of the society. But if you look at anthropology, the societies that have been traditionally studied by anthropology, because it started with the study of what? These other cultures. It started in the European society as what? The study of the other cultures. So what happened is during these studies that they conducted initially, what they did is they took up almost all the dimensions of that culture. And that has become a tradition in anthropology. That has become a tradition in anthropology. If you look at anthropology as a very simplistic, if you just look at the syllabus of the anthropology, it talks about physical anthropology, the biological aspect first. Second, it talks about the cultural aspects, right? Within the cultural aspect, it talks about different dimensions like marriage institution, family, kinship, right? Economic institutions, political institutions, religious institutions. Almost if they are studying a society, they will look at these different dimensions of their society. It will look at these dimensions of their society, right? It is not just restricting itself to only one particular field. It is not restricting itself to one particular field. It is taking into account almost all the dimensions of the societies that it is studying. This is how it started. Even today, it does the same thing. Even today, it is doing the same thing, where these fields have developed as unique fields in the anthropology itself. That is why it is called as holistic, because it is not just restricting itself to either economic or political or religious. It is taking into account almost all the dimensions, not just the socio-cultural, even the physical. For example, one of the famous anthropologists, that is Malinowski, Brenzlaw Malinowski, he conducted his field work in Pacific Islands, Trobriand Islanders. He conducted his field work there. He almost went on to record the physical characteristics of the people living in that area, right? Their marital practices, their familial practices, their kinship system, their economic aspects, their political aspects, and their religious aspects. Right? The account that he wrote, the work that he published, took into account all these dimensions of the culture that he was studying. Right? And these accounts that were written by these initial anthropologists were called as ethnographies. What were they called as? Ethnography. These anthropologists, in the beginning, they wrote what? Ethnographies of these cultures. And these ethnographies were not just any account of one dimension of the societies. They included almost every dimension of that society. Right? But if you compare it with the understanding that are found of the modern societies, there are different disciplines that have been developed to cater to different dimensions of the humankind. Economics to deal with economics, political science to deal with the political institutions, right? Psychology to deal with the human brain. Agree or not? So here what you find is that they have developed one approach which is unique, which has remained a very important feature of anthropology today, which is holistic. Even today, when anthropology and the research that is going on, it still draws on from different disciplines that are functional in different dimensions. For example, forensic science, it is being used in anthropology. Right? It is still a part of anthropology. If you look at the syllabus, it is so broad that it has included almost all the dimensions of the humankind. Yes or no? Right? You find the mention of almost all the dimensions of the human beings here. All the social institutions are part of it. Right? Different dimensions of the physical aspects of the human being are part of it. Right? It is holistic in the sense that it is not just including all these dimensions. It is holistic also in the sense that it studies the human beings across the times and across the spaces. It studies the human beings across time and space. What is meant by this?
So by time, it means from past to present.
From past to present. The diversity that exists today. Right? Temporal and spatial. Both the dimensions are included. And in these dimensions, different other dimensions are part of that. For example, if you look at the temporal aspect of it, one of the simple example of temporal aspect can be seen in the biological evolution that we are going to study in the physical. Temporal evolution, if you look at the study of this, you are going to look at what? The evolution that has happened. Right? Even within the evolutionary journey, we try to understand the diversity that existed at that point of time. For example, in the recent past ka matlab 10-20 saal nahi hai, millions of years or thousands of the years before, we find that there were multiple species of the humans that were walking on this planet. There were Neanderthals, there were Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Homo floresiensis. Agree? So even within this temporal aspect, the spatial diversity was accounted into. To give what? A holistic understanding of the phenomena that is being studied. Following? Yes, no? Yes, temporal, spatial. We started with understanding that it takes into account the universals and the differences, right? Then we went on to highlight that these are the four important aspects. Even within the first aspect, that is holism, it has been compared with the atomism, which is generally followed by different disciplines. But it is not the case in anthropology, because it takes into account almost all the dimensions of the human existence today. Right? Here again, it is studying different dimensions. The initial works that were done by the anthropologists, they reflect this. Like Malinowski's work in the Trobriand Islands, where he published his famous ethnography, or the ethnography that they used to produce were called as monographs. Right? Monographs. In that, they talked about different dimensions of those cultures. So whenever there is an anthropological inquiry, it has to be holistic in nature. What this also tells us is when we write the answer, we need to follow these approaches. हम जब आंसर लिखते हैं तो हम क्या सुनते हैं कि क्या-क्या लिखना चाहिए. This dimension has to be there. Have you touched upon the different dimensions of a particular phenomena that has been asked in the examination? Especially in anthropology. We'll go on to expand these other aspects, but that is going to further add on to your understanding of what anthropology as a discipline is, and at the same time, what is the requirement of the anthropology as a discipline, and what you need to do while writing the answers also. Right? Coming back to our original discussion where we discussed that anthropology developed as a discipline to study the other cultures. It developed as a discipline to study what? The other cultures, because it was an offshoot of the colonialism that started in the Europe. Right? Sociology developed as a discipline to study their own societies, while anthropology developed as a discipline to study these so-called other cultures. Right? How to study these other cultures? That has always been a question in anthropology. And as such, we see that there are various theories that have developed over a period of time. Right? These are the approaches that have developed over a period of time to study the different societies or other societies. All of us agree? Yes or no? It started with the study of the other cultures. In this, we have developed various theoretical approaches, where we find the beginning of these theoretical approaches with a school which is called as what? The evolutionism. Who were the pioneers?
E.B. Tyler, Alex Morgan.
E.B. Tyler, L.H. Morgan, the primary ones. और भी बहुत सारे थे, Fraser वगैरह. But these are the two prominent names that are taken. E.B. Tyler and L.H. Morgan. Edward Burnett Tyler and Louis Henry Morgan. These were the pioneers. Tyler published his famous work, Primitive Culture, while L.H. Morgan published his famous work, Ancient Society. First lecture, I have discussed these things. Somebody who has not attended that, please go and attend that lecture. It's there on the e-learn. Fair enough. So in this, what happened is in the evolutionism, they started following a scheme in which they said that the cultures evolve in 3 stages, from savagery into barbarism and finally into civilization. Finally into civilization, which they considered as the highest stage of cultural development. Which they referred as the what? The highest stage of the cultural evolution. And according to them, the tribals that you see today, the so-called primitive societies that you see today, are still in the first stage of the cultural evolution. While the European society, on the other hand, has reached the highest stage of cultural development, and that is what? Civilization stage. That is what? The civilization state. Right? And what is civilization? Do they not
Presence
have?
of a distinct culture.
हिस्ट्री पढ़ा है किसी ने? हिस्ट्री के अंदर एंशिएंट हिस्ट्री किताब पढ़ी होगी सबने, आर एस शर्मा. उसमें चैप्टर कैसे चलते हैं? स्टोन एज चलती है, जिसके अंदर लोअर पेलियोलिथिक, मिडिल पेलियोलिथिक, अपर पेलियोलिथिक, वो सब चलता है. एंड दीज स्टेजेस आर टर्म्ड एज प्री हिस्ट्री. क्या बोलते हैं इनको? प्री हिस्ट्री. राइट? While the next is called as proto history. And lastly, we have the history, starting from the Vedic civilization. Right? The societies which are literate societies, which have texts that they have developed, these are sometimes considered synonymous with the civilization, who have urban characteristics. That is why we use the term Indus Valley civilization. They had developed a script, but it is yet to be deciphered. That is why it is called as proto-historical society. Right? And these societies have written histories. These societies have written texts, while these societies have a system, which is oral tradition. These societies have a tradition which is called as what? The oral tradition. Their knowledge is transmitted orally, while their knowledge is transmitted through authoritative texts, which are used for accounting the various dimensions of the society. So they thought that they have achieved the highest stage of civilization. And it was seen as synonymous with the European society, and even in the European society with the Victorian England. ये सबसे हाईएस्ट डेवलपमेंट है. इसके आगे तुम अभी कोई पहुंच नहीं पाया. ठीक है? And this has become a part of our common language also. Even today, people aspire to become or achieve the developed stage of these Western countries. Downside तो होगी, बाद में देखेंगे. Abhi we need to understand that these are the societies which do not have any literary texts. आप अंडमान निकोबार जाओ, सेंटिनली से पूछो आपकी किताबें हमको दे दो, हम पढ़ के समझ लेते हैं. आप उनको आज मिलेगी नहीं. सेंटिनलीज जरावाज मना कर देंगे, है ही नहीं भाई, मार भी देंगे तुमको. Yes or no? So what we find here is that this scheme talked about an evolution into these three stages of the cultures, from savagery to barbarism to civilization. Right? And they considered that civilization to which they themselves belonged, to which Tyler and Morgan themselves belonged, because Tyler was an Englishman while Morgan was an American. They thought that they have reached the highest stage of cultural development, and that is why they have reached the civilized state. Right? But such a view makes you believe that the other cultures that they studied, these tribals or the primitives, they were backward. They were primitive. Right? And what they were actually trying to do is they were trying to understand the cultural practices of these so-called primitive and the tribal societies through their own cultural lens. That is why they were passing stereotypical judgments about the cultural evolution of these tribal societies. And this view has been called as the ethnocentric view. But later, with the theoretical developments in the schools in anthropology, the approach that was propounded by Franz Boas was known as the historical particularism. That is, he said that to understand these cultures, you need to look into their histories. But the problem is their histories are not written. Their histories are what? Oral. right? So you take an account of their folklores. You take an account of their folklores. And if you try to understand their cultural practices in their historical context, if you try to understand their cultures in their historical context, this was referred to as the historical particularism. That is, their particular histories will make us understand these cultures, rather than you start viewing these cultures through your own cultural lens, right? And this historical particularism then expanded into an idea called as cultural relativism as an approach in anthropology, where he talked about looking at these cultures in their historical context. While this developed as a broad approach in anthropology of looking at these cultures in their own cultural contexts, in which history is one of the aspects. In which history is one of the aspects. Hence, cultural relativism has evolved as one of the important pillars in anthropology. Holistic. Second, what? Cultural relativism. Third, what we find is participant observation. Initially, when the theoretical approaches started in anthropology, what they did is the data on which they relied, these judgments that they passed about these primitive societies were based on what? The secondary data, the data that was sent to them by the British administrators or administrators who were ruling these areas. Whatever they observed, they sent it to the anthropologists back home. Right? Whatever they had, whatever these British administrators had observed, they sent this data back to these anthropologists. On the basis of those observations, they tried to come up with certain generalization. They developed this theory of evolution, that these are in the primitive stage of the evolution. Right? But then Malinowski is said to have redefined the way in which these cultures are studied. Malinowski, who belonged to the functionalist school, he developed a new way of studying these cultures, and that is called as the participant observation. That is, you go live with those societies, live and be a part of that culture, and then try to write about that culture. This participant observation as a technique has led to an approach in the anthropology that is called as the fieldwork tradition in anthropology. Which tradition? Fieldwork tradition in anthropology. Right? Fieldwork tradition in the anthropology. And Malinowski's famous work in the Trobriand Island, because Malinowski is central hai in anthropology. Everywhere you will find a discussion related to Malinowski. Regarding the discipline itself, regarding the different approaches, Malinowski cannot be discounted. Right? That is why every year or the other, you find a question on Malinowski. Or you find what? Indirect usage of the Malinowski's works. Right? So what started from the Franz Boas' ideas of historical particularism and the broader understanding of cultural relativism, the later theories reflect the cultural relativism only. The ethnocentrism ended with, or it still was existing in some way or the other, but cultural relativism was accepted by almost all the other later theoretical approaches in anthropology. Right? While participant observation, that is, you go and live with these tribes, you then try to account for their cultural practices, and that too you have to do what? Holistically. Sare dimensions ko account karna hai. Right? And fourth important aspect is called as the cross-cultural comparison. Is called as what? Cross-cultural comparison. And this has developed as a part of comparative method. What this refers to is, what did the initial anthropologists do? These initial anthropologists who talked about what? Evolutionism as an idea. They started from highlighting that the cultures evolve in these three stages, from savagery to barbarism to civilization. They say that cultures evolve in this fashion. They start with savagery stage, reach barbarism, then ultimately they reach the highest stage of the civilization. Right? How did they arrive at these conclusions? They arrived at these conclusions by considering what? By comparing these primitive societies with the modern so-called civilized societies. And on the basis of this comparison, they started coming up with these stereotypical explanations that these are belonging to primitive stages of the evolution. They were comparing different cultures at the same time, right? In fact, they said that these primitive cultures can broadly be equated with the hunting-gathering stage in the human evolution. They started with the understanding of what? They started comparing altogether different societies to come up with these generalizations, right? And these generalizations that have been provided, they have been termed as ethnology. These general rules that they have tried to come up with, these general theoretical propositions that they have tried to come up with, this is called as ethnology. It has been a result of the cross-cultural comparisons. Fine? Following? So this is how these are the 4 unique pillars of anthropology. Now start writing. Etymologically, the term anthropology is composed of two Greek words. Anthropos and logos, both in quotes. Anthropos and logos, right? Anthropos refers to man. Anthropos refers to man, in bracket, human beings. While logos refers to studying scientifically. While logos refers to studying scientifically. As such, anthropology refers to the scientific study of human beings. Write down definitions. We'll write 3 definitions here. First, write down A.L. Kroeber. A.L. Kroeber. The definitions have to be put in quotes. Write down. Anthropology is the science. Of man. Anthropology is the science of man. Then write down Melville J. Herskovits. Melville J. Herskovits. Melville J. Herskovits. In general, you can use this term itself. Herskovits. अभी क्या नए नए नाम है, बाद में तो ये रोजमर्रा के नाम है जो पार्ट ऑफ द वोकेबलरी बन जाएंगे। ठीक है, मेलविल जे हर्स्कोविट्स, व्हाट ही सेज एज द डेफिनेशन, क्या डेफिनेशन दी इसने? Anthropology is the study of man and his works. Write down. Anthropology is the study of man and his works. Right? Then write down Clyde Kluckhohn. Clyde Kluckhohn. HN. Cohen. Kluckhohn. In quotes, write down, he says, in quotes, write down, out of all the sciences, out of all the sciences, out of all the sciences which study various aspects of man, anthropology is the one. Anthropology is the one which comes nearest to the total study of man. An analysis of various definitions, write down next line. An analysis of various definitions brings out the following features. Of anthropology. In this, write down first. Under the definition man and his works, under the definition man and his works, in bracket Herzkowitz, man and his works, in bracket Herzkowitz, man refers to the human beings as biological organisms, while the works refer to in quotes culture. Next, write down, it accepts and uses the general principles. It accepts and uses the general principles of both biological, and social sciences, and as such is considered as is considered as a biosocial science? Does anthropology is considered as the most humanistic among sciences and the most scientific among the humanities? And the most scientific among humanities. Right? Then write down next point. Anthropology comes nearest to the total study of mankind. In this next point, anthropology comes nearest to the total study of man. Who said this? Clucon. Right? In bracket, Clucon. Write down. Anthropology comes nearest to the total study of man. In bracket, Clucon. Reflecting the holistic and integrated nature of the discipline. Reflecting the holistic and integrated nature of the discipline. It studies, next point, it studies physical, social, and cultural development. It studies physical, social, and cultural development in time and space. In time and space. Temporally, write down next point, temporally, it studies how humans have evolved biologically and culturally. How humans have evolved biologically and culturally. While spatially, it studies geographical variations across times, both physiological as well as cultural. Does it studies both the universals and the differences? Universals and differences in the biological and the cultural aspects of the human beings. Right? Then write down example. How the universals and differences are reflected. So first write down biological. First write down biological. First write down biological. In this write down first subheading is similarities or universals. Similarities or universals. Right? Write down. Human beings are part of the order primate. Human beings are part of the order primate in the animal kingdom. Like chimpanzees. With whom we share 98%, approximately 98% of genetic material and many biological and cultural features. Right? Next, write down differences. In the biological itself, there are differences. However, there are considerable differences between the humans and the other members of the primate order. And the other members of the primate order, wherein bipedalism means the ability to walk on two limbs. Why do we call humans as the bipedals while the chimpanzees as the quadrupedals? वो लोग कभी कभी नहीं चल सकते हैं दोनों लिम्ब पे. What's the first instinctive movement? ऐसा नहीं कि इंसान चार लिम्ब पे नहीं चल सकता है. आपको चलवाऊंगा तो आप चल लोगे ना. अगर मैं, if the people who are sitting here, if I make them walk on their four limbs, they have the capability, they possess the capability. But what is the habitual way of walking or locomotion on this planet Earth? It is bipedal for the human beings. The habitual one for chimpanzees is quadrupedal. Right? For chimpanzees is quadrupedal. For dogs it is quadrupedalism. The habitual way of walking. Dogs को भी कभी कोशिश कराते हैं, सिखाते हैं तो वो दो पैर पे खड़े तो हो जाते हैं. तो लेकिन उनको अपन बाइपेडल नहीं बोलते. We do not call them bipedal. The dogs or the chimpanzees. They possess the capability of being bipedal sometimes, but their instinctive way of locomotion is quadrupedal. While for humans, the instinctive way of locomotion is bipedal. Although they possess the capability of walking on four limbs also. You can use four limbs. For example, if you go to gym, etc., वहां पे वो ape walk कराते हैं. The instructors make you do an ape walk. Right? So that some of your muscles which have been unused are also used now. Got it? So you possess the capability of walking on quadrupedal or your four limbs, but you habitually walk bipedal. Right? And that has been a part of our evolution. that has been seen to be one of the prominent events that happened in the human evolution, where we became habitually bipedal. When we became habitually bipedal, our forelimbs were freed now. Our forelimbs were freed now. And these forelimbs were not used for what? For locomotion anymore. Only the feet were used for what? Locomotion. Only the lower limbs were used for locomotion. Once these forelimbs were freed, there were enough modification even in the hand structure. There were enough modification in the hand structure. And it was not just one-off event that we became bipedal. It was slowly progressing, and there were other changes that were also happening in the human body. Right? That is why a question that is generally asked in the physical anthropology is costs and benefits of bipedalism or erect posture. Brain size increased. Human brain size increased considerably. Right? The time period required for the maturity of the human baby, that also increased. Right? So there were so many changes that came up with the idea of bipedalism. But just to understand it right now, we find that it is something that is unique to human beings. Right? We find so much diversity even within the primate order. Right? Whereby chimpanzees are different as compared to gorillas. Gorillas are different as compared to orangutans. These are different as compared to gibbons and siamangs. These are different as compared to the monkeys. New World monkeys are different from the Old World monkeys. These monkeys combinedly are different from the tarsiers, lemurs, or lorises, which are all part of the primate group. Agree? So in general, we universally categorize human beings as what? Primates. So the question that can be asked is, why is human being considered as a member of the primate order? Padhenge usko, but just know that these are the strands that we need to be aware of. Right? So if you look at the similarities, we belong to the primate order, and we look for similarities with the other members of the primate orders. And we do not just stop here at finding the similarities. We also go on to further find out the differences that are there. We also go on to find out what? The differences that are there. Agree? So that is why universals and differences, similarities and diversities, or the differences, that has been an integral part of the anthropology. Then write down cultural. First, we have seen biological similarities and differences. Now write down cultural similarities and differences.
What was the last line? Wherein bipedalism?
Wherein bipedalism, then write down comma. Likho, miss ho gaya to. Communication through language. Communication through language is unique. To human beings only. To human beings only in the whole of order primate. In the whole of order primate. Following? Then write down cultural. Biological. We have seen the example. In cultural, how do we see the universals and the variations? Write down. Universals. Subheading. Universal. In this, write down. Marriage is near universal. Marriage is a near universal institution. Marriage is a near universal institution found in all human societies. Found in all human societies. Further, incest taboo. Further, incest taboo, which prohibits sexual intercourse, between closely related individuals is also near universal. Then write down variation or differences or variation. Right? This is the universal thing in institution of marriage. Then what are the differences? So write down. However, there are different types of marriage. However, there are different types of marriage like polygamy, polyandry, endogamy, exogamy, cross cousin marriages, which are found in different societies across the globe. Okay? So in the end, write down, does anthropology is a comparative and integrated discipline that examines all societies across time and space. Okay? Then make a next heading, uniqueness or distinctiveness of anthropology. Right? Now, what happens is when you're going to write about what is the meaning or what is anthropology, you're also going to use these points that we write in the uniqueness of the anthropology. Like it is holistic. It has cultural relativism as one of the features. It has fieldwork tradition or participant observation as one of the feature. Right? And cross-cultural comparisons are an integral part. You are going to write it in the first portion also. Right? For the sake of simplicity, we have not written all of these things there. We're including them in the uniqueness. For example, there's a question that comes up related to uniqueness of anthropology as a discipline. Then you are going to go on expanding upon these dimensions of holism, expansion of cross-cultural comparisons, participant observation, and the cross-cultural and the cultural relativism, right? So write down 4 points first. In the uniqueness, write down 4 points. These 4 points, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we'll go on expanding them. Uniqueness or distinctiveness of anthropology will be the heading in which you are going to write these 4 points. Holism versus atomism or holistic approach simply. Second, cultural relativism. Third, participant observation. And lastly, cross-cultural comparison. Now write down first. Holism or holistic approach. Holism or holistic approach versus atomism. Okay? Write down. Atomism refers to the reduction of the reduction of the whole phenomena into particular elements. This approach is used by disciplines like history, political science, economics, etc. Right? Then write down again the definition given by Clyde Kluckhohn. क्या definition लिखी? लिखो उसको वापस देख के. Just write down the last part of it. That is, anthropology comes nearest to the total study of the man. हाँ. Clyde Kluckhohn's definition is anthropology comes nearest to the total study of the man. This definition highlights the holistic approach that is followed under anthropology. Right? Under anthropology. It is an approach, write down. It is an approach that studies many aspects of a multifaceted system. Right? Then write down, it cuts across. Sorry, it studies the man in totality. It studies the man in totality and cuts across time and space. Underline time and space. Right? It attempts to get the whole picture. And applies knowledge from different fields. Right? It is unlike other disciplines. Which focus on one particular aspect of the humanity. Okay? Now we are going to write down certain case studies to highlight the holistic nature of anthropology, right? Write down case studies first. Right, in the case studies, dash write down ethnographic studies and fieldworks. Ethnographic studies and fieldworks. First, write down Franz Boas. Franz Boas. Some of them are case studies, some of them are examples, right? So first is Franz Boas. 1 2 3 4 करके लिखेंगे, फर्स्ट लिखेंगे और उसको डिटेल में लिखेंगे भी उसके बारे में. Franz Boas. Write down. He touched upon all the aspects of man. He touched upon all the aspects of man for the scientific study. For the scientific study under anthropology. He emphasized the need for studying. He emphasized the need for studying physical, linguistic, physical, linguistic, archaeological, physical, linguistic, archaeological, and cultural aspects. Cultural aspects of the man under the discipline of anthropology. It is said that Franz Boas did not belong to any particular school, did not belong to any particular school of thought, which reflect his holistic approach, He had contributed more than 700 articles. 700 articles on different aspects of anthropology, like कौन से स्कूल के थे ये? Historical particularism. What was his emphasis? Just don't write down. What was his emphasis? His emphasis was on understanding the cultural practices in their historical context. Right? So historical context means you study their history. But how do you study their history? Because most of these cultures do not have written histories. So focus on their folklores. So write down now. Like folklores, linguistics, comma, physical anthropology, as well as archaeology. Second write down, Malinowski. First was Franz Boas. Second write down, Malinowski. Malinowski. ठीक है, Malinowski. His famous work is, write down the name of the work, Trobriand Island. He did his field work here, these islands, Trobriand Islands. In bracket, write down the year in which he conducted the field work. 1915 to 1918. Trobriand Island. By the end of the anthropology, इतने सारे यूनिक टर्म्स सुनने को मिल जाएंगे और याद हो जाएंगे. So write down. He developed an approach. He developed an approach for field work. He developed an approach for field work known as the participant, known as the participant observation, participant observation in quotes. Right? 15 to 1918. Right? This field work led to publishing of a famous ethnographic account that he wrote. It is known as Argonauts of Western Pacific. Argonauts of Western Pacific in the year 1922. ठीक है, ब्लॉक में रख देना यहाँ पे. Don't forget the name. Argonauts of Western Pacific, 1922. In this famous work, write down, in this famous work, Argonauts of Western Pacific. Write down, in this famous work, Malinowski focused upon the different aspects of the Trobriand Islanders, the Trobriand Islanders, which include ABCD करके you can write down. Physical characteristics of the natives. Physical characteristics of the natives. Next, main features of their social and economic life. Main features of their social and economic life. Then write down. He provided an outline. Of the Trobriand economy He provided an outline of the Trobriand economy, comma, kinship system, comma, kinship system, comma, beliefs, comma, ceremonies, and chieftainship, to understand in detail, the dimensions of, to understand in detail the dimensions of Kula ring, which was a system of ceremonial exchange of goods and articles, which were generally of no economic value. Which were generally of no economic value. Now, what happened is, now if you try to study the tribal cultures, then if you look at their economy, this is what happened. This was one of the issues that was faced by the British anthropologists or the anthropologists of that time when they tried to study these tribal cultures and when they tried to study their economy, right? The models that they used to explain their economy were the models that they were using for themselves, like the ones that we still use for ourselves. The market model of understanding the economy, right? Or the capitalistic model of understanding the economy, right? Wherein the goods and services that are exchanged, they have economic value, right? Money is the very important mode of exchange of the articles in our economy, right? This is the most prominent way in which the economy functions, or the market model is the near universal model that is used by all the major developed economies, developed or developing economies for that matter. But when these anthropologists, they observed the tribal economies, they found that they do not have the meaning of money in their societies till now. Money, whatever has been introduced in the tribal societies today, if you go and see the tribal societies today, you'll find that now they've started using money, no doubt about it. But 200 years back, 100 years back, 150 years back, they did not have any conception of money, right? And all of their exchanges were regulated by their social relations rather than their economic aspects or focusing upon the monetary aspects, right? And what was found by Malinowski in one such practices in the Trobriand Islanders was the exchange of certain articles, which per se did not sound like having any economic value, right? But if you look at the underlying value that was there, it was only the social value or the recurrence of this event every year of exchanging these articles. That is what started making sense in some way or the other, right? And then he propounded this explanation of the Kula ring and tried to explain why this Kula ring is important to the Trobriand Islanders, although it might sound what? A wasteful practice, a time-wasting activity to an outsider, that you are not even exchanging valuables, right? And you are undertaking such dangerous journeys across the islands. What used to happen is there were many small islands in the Western Pacific. Every island had a specific way of life, no doubt about it, right? But there were regular annual event wherein people used to build their canoes or the small boats that they used to build. And on these boats, they used to travel across the islands in a circular fashion, risking their lives, right? For the exchange of these articles, which themselves did not make any economic sense to an outsider. Why are you undertaking such difficult journeys to exchange such articles? What could be explained in this is that they have something called as ceremonial exchange, which is beyond the basic economic explanation that is used by the modern societies. And that is why a different model is required to understand these economic exchanges in these societies. Just giving you a glimpse of it. In economic anthropology, we have to study this. But collaring is one such phenomena that was most talked about. And it was based on the field work done by Malinowski. And to explain this collaring is basically what? There are so many islands that were there in the Pacific Ocean. And there was a specific ritualized event in which the people used to travel across these islands in circular and in clockwise and anti-clockwise manner on their boats. One island to the other, one island to the other. Right? So he tried to explain this phenomena by explaining various other dimensions of their life, because he found that it could not be explained by only one phenomena, that is the economic phenomena that we observe in our society. Right? And that is why a unique anthropological holistic approach is required to explain this simple exchange, which looks economic on the face of it, but it is not actually a economic exchange in the true sense of the market economy. Okay? It is one of the famous works, and it is still regarded as one of the most influential works of all time. And every now and then a question is asked on the collaring and its understanding. Got it? Tomorrow we'll continue from this. I expect you to go back home, read the chapter number 1 of Kerala State SCRT. People who are new, people who have not started studying those chapters, study that chapter. And what is anthropology from Amber and Ember, first chapter. At least those 2 chapters you are required to study. Following people online, जिन लोगों ने कैमरा बंद करके और ऐसे हाँ करा है, उनको मैं कैसे समझूं?
Yes, sir. Clear.
तुम्हारा तो मुझे चेहरा दिख गया था. People who have turned off the camera. If you are nodding your head, I cannot see you. Either write it down in the chat box or turn on your camera.
Yes, sir.
Fine. चेहरा दिखाने से डरते हो क्या तुम लोग? किससे मुंह छुपा रहे हो? जमाने से? अभी लंबा है रास्ता. चलो, see you tomorrow. Come reading these chapters and go through both these lectures once again to understand a broad idea. Write down or just revise whatever we have written today. Okay? Because this is going to be your basic learning in the first 5-10 classes. Your broader understanding of the discipline will emerge. And then we are going to jump on to specific topics which are important for us from exam perspective. Fine? Chalo. Now, you guys, please send me a request for sharing the link of the group. I'll share it to you. Fine? See you tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.